Bismarck Sea, March 3, 1943, at 0600 hours, and Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, commanding Replenishment Convoy L, stands on the bridge of his flagship, watching 8 destroyers guide 8 fully loaded transport ships through waters that Japanese naval doctrine says belong to the Empire. The convoy carries the reinforcements that the 51st Divisions desperately needed. 6,900 troops who have been promised to Lieutenant General Hatazō Adachi at Lae, and Kimura have every reason to believe that they will arrive safely because Japanese warships have sailed these waters for more than a year without serious challenge from U.S. surface forces. What Admiral Kimura can't know, what no Japanese naval officer could imagine in their darkest nightmares, is that American mechanics in Australian workshops have transformed medium bombers into something that will turn these waters into an extermination camp. And within 4 hours, modified B-25 Mitchell bombers with 850 caliber machine guns protruding from their noses like the fangs of a mechanical demon will turn their convoy into flaming wreckage strewn across the Bismarck Sea. The Japanese Navy's confidence comes from experience, from victories at Pearl Harbor and the Java Sea, from the apparent inability of American high-altitude bombers to attack moving ships, and from the belief that the anti-aircraft guns of their destroyers can handle any low-flying aircraft dumb enough to approach within range. Captain Tamichihara, commanding the destroyer Shigane, has sailed these waters between Rabaul and Lae several times, and he knows that the Americans have tried everything to stop Japanese convoys, including high bombardment from B-7 flying fortresses that rarely hit anything, torpedo attacks that require long, straight approaches that make attacking planes perfect targets, and medium-altitude bombardments that buy ships plenty of time to maneuver away from falling bombs. The Imperial Japanese Navy has developed specific tactics to deal with air threats, including quick evasive maneuvers, concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple ships, and fighter coverage from the 11th Air Fleet based at Rabaul. And these tactics have worked well enough for Admiral Gunichi Mikawa to approve this convoy despite knowing the Americans would detect it. Japanese naval officers understand air warfare differently than their American counterparts, seeing it primarily as a battle between ships and horizontal bombers or torpedo planes, encounters in which disciplined anti-aircraft fire and sharp maneuvers can defeat most attacks. Commander Yasumi Doi aboard the destroyer Tokitsuki has trained his gun crews relentlessly, teaching them to concentrate their 25mm guns on approaching aircraft in order to lead their targets properly and maintain constant fire even when under attack. The convoy's anti-aircraft defenses include more than 125mm guns, dozens of 13mm machine guns, and the destroyer's 5-inch dual-purpose guns, creating what Japanese doctrine calls a steel umbrella over ships. These defenses have proven effective against conventional attacks, shooting down or expelling American bombers on numerous occasions, giving the Japanese confidence that they can handle anything the Allies throw at them. The transport ships themselves carry vital cargo beyond the soldiers, including ammunition, medical supplies, food, and equipment that Japanese forces in Lae desperately need to hold their position in New Guinea. The largest transport, Kambaru, displaces more than 6,000 tons and carries an entire regiment of the 51st Division, men who have been waiting in Rabaul for weeks for the weather conditions that would allow the convoy to set sail. Each transport has been carefully loaded to maximize troop numbers while still carrying essential supplies, and soldiers have been informed that they are sailing into a combat zone where U.S. aircraft are active, but where Japanese naval superiority should protect them during the relatively short trip to Lae. The convoy maintains a precise formation with destroyers that protect the transports, ready to respond to submarine attacks or air threats, following procedures that have been perfected over 2 years of war in the Pacific. What makes March 3, 1943 different from all previous convoy operations is not immediately apparent to Japanese lookouts who see the first American aircraft approaching from the south. Lieutenant Commander Ikeda, aboard the destroyer Asashia, reports multiple contacts at medium altitude. What appears to be a standard American B-7 and B-25 bombardment formation is approaching about 7,000 feet, exactly the type of attack for which the convoy has been prepared. Japanese gun crews swing their guns at the oncoming plane, calculating deflection and altitude, preparing to lift the curtain of anti-aircraft fire that has protected so many convoys before. But they still don't see the other plane approaching wave height, B-25 Mitchell, that have been modified in ways that the Japanese cannot imagine. The modification of the B-25 Mitchell bombers into machine gun gunships represents one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Pacific War. Born out of frustration over the ineffectiveness of conventional bombing raids on ships, Major Paul Irvin Gunn, known as Pappy, a former Navy pilot turned Army Air Force officer, understood that hitting moving ships from high altitude was nearly impossible, and that torpedo attacks required specialized training and equipment that Army Air Forces did not have in the Southwest Pacific. Working with U.S. Aviation Field Representative Jack Fox at Eagle Farm Airfield near Brisbane, Australia, Gunn began installing additional 50 caliber machine guns in the nose of B-25 bombers, eliminating the bomber position and creating space for 4 guns initially, later expanding to 8 guns in later modifications. The work required extensive reinforcement of the aircraft structure, additional ammunition storage, and careful weight distribution to keep the aircraft balanced, challenges that Gunn and his mechanics solved through trial and error. The 50 caliber machine guns chosen for these modifications fired the M8 armor-piercing incendiary shell, a 619-grain shell traveling at 2,910 feet per second, capable of penetrating the deck armor of destroyers and causing fires with its incendiary component. Each weapon could fire 850 rounds per minute, meaning that 8 cannons firing together unleashed 6,800 rounds per minute, a stream of destruction that could literally rip through a ship's superstructure, destroy anti-aircraft positions, and kill exposed crew members before they could react. The psychological effect of confronting this weapon would be as devastating as its physical destruction, as Japanese sailors who survived these attacks would describe the terror of seeing a B-25's nose light up with muzzle flashes, knowing that hundreds of piercing rounds were about to pierce their ship. The development of jump bombing tactics perfectly complemented the strafer modifications, allowing the B-25s to attack ships at high altitude while dropping bombs with deadly accuracy. Major William Benn of the 43rd Bombardment Group had pioneered the technique using B-7s, finding that bombs dropped 200 to 250 feet above the water jumped like stones, bounced off the sides of ships, or exploded close enough to cause fatal damage.
The technique required precise timing and incredible courage, as pilots had to fly in a straight, level line towards their targets at low altitude, making them perfect targets for anti-aircraft fire. But the accuracy achieved was revolutionary compared to high-altitude bombardment. Pilots practicing endlessly against the wreck of the SS Pruth on a reef near Port Moresby learned to judge distances, speeds, and launch points until they could constantly jump bombs at targets. General George Kenney, commanding the 5th Air Force, recognized the potential of combining machine gun modifications with jump bombing tactics, creating what he called commercial destroyers that could devastate Japanese ships. By March 1943, the 3rd Strike Group had been fully converted to machine gun configuration, with the 90th Bombardment Squadron commanded by Major Edward Lerner leading the way in developing attack tactics that maximized the effectiveness of the 8-gun nose. The standard attack profile required the B-25s to approach 1,000 to 1,500 feet, then drop to maximum wave height about 2 miles from the target, accelerating to top speed while the pilot aligned his aircraft with the target craft. At 1,500 yards, the pilot would open fire with all 8 nose guns, spraying the target with armor-piercing incendiary rounds while maintaining his focus for jump bombardment. The first indication Admiral Kimura has that something unprecedented is about to happen comes when the B-17s at 7,000 feet begin their bombardments, drawing the attention of all the Japanese anti-aircraft guns in the convoy. The destroyer's crews perform exactly as trained, placing an impressive 25mm and 5-inch barrage of fire. Their tracers create a deadly pattern in the sky around the American bombers. But this is exactly what the American planners intended. While all Japanese eyes are watching the high-altitude bombers, while all the guns are pointed skyward, 13 Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters and 12 B-25 Mitchell Strafers from the 3rd Strike Group arrive at wave height from the southwest, approaching so low that their propeller wash creates spray patterns on the ocean's surface. Major Edward Lerner leads the B-25 attack in his Mitchell, nicknamed Ruthless, and as he approaches the destroyer Shirayuki at 280 miles per hour, he can see Japanese sailors on deck pointing at his plane in shock and confusion. The Japanese have seen B-25s before, but never set up like this. Never with 8 black holes in the nose where machine guns stick out like accusing fingers, and never approaching an altitude where the pilot can see individual faces on the deck of the boat. Lerner waits until he's 1,200 yards behind Shirayuki before pulling the trigger, and instantly 8 50-caliber death streams spread toward the Japanese destroyer, the tracer's rounds creating solid lines of light between the plane and the boat. The effect on Shirayuki is instantaneous and catastrophic as hundreds of armor-piercing incendiary rounds slam into its bridge and superstructure at 2,910 feet per second. The bridge's windows explode in showers of glass that shatter anyone nearby. The thin armor of the gun's shields provides no protection from 50-caliber rounds that cut through steel like paper, and within seconds, the destroyer's anti-aircraft guns fall silent, as its crews are literally torn apart by concentrated fire. A Japanese ensign named Takashi Maeda, one of the few survivors of the Shirayuki Bridge, would later describe the attack as being trapped in a giant metal-cutting saw, seeing his captain and most of the bridge crew reduced in seconds by sparkling, flashing rounds as they tore through steel bulkheads. Lerner maintains his firing run for 8 seconds, pouring more than 900 rounds into Shirayuki before dropping 2 500-pound bombs that leap over the water like stones, hitting the destroyer's hull just below the waterline. Bombs equipped with 5-second delay fuses penetrate Shirayuki's hull before detonating. The explosions broke the destroyer's back and opened huge holes that flooded its engine rooms in a matter of minutes. As Lerner stops and walks away, his gunner sprays the destroyer's deck with his turret-mounted 50 calibers. Shirayuki is already heavily port-listing. Its crew abandon their weapons to fight floods that cannot be controlled. Behind Lerner, 11 more B-25s are selecting targets among the convoy. Its pilots were surprised at how the Japanese ships seemed crippled by this unprecedented form of attack. Lieutenant John Hembry takes aim at the transport Kawakushi Maru, walking his 8-gun burst from bow to stern, watching as his tracers traverse the ship's bridge, demolish his forward cargo handling equipment, and silence his anti-aircraft positions before his jump bombs break through his hull. The captain of the transport, who tries to maneuver away from the attack, finds that his rudder is unresponsive because the helmsman and most of the bridge crew are dead, cut by 50-caliber rounds that turned the bridge into a charnel of mangled bodies and twisted metal. The Beaufighters add to the carnage, their 4 20mm guns and 6 .33 caliber machine guns focusing on anti-aircraft positions and bridge crews, suppressing any attempt at organized defense. Flight Sergeant Fred Cassidy, flying a 30 Squadron Beaufighter, approaches the Teomaru transport at 500 feet, diving to mast height in the final seconds as his cannons break through the ship's superstructure. Cassidy would later describe how the ship's bridge disintegrated under the impact of 20mm explosive rounds. He saw Japanese sailors thrown into the air by explosions, watched lifeboats break into wood when their rounds encountered them. The jump bombing proved devastatingly effective, as bomb after bomb bounces off the water to crash into Japanese hulls at the waterline. The delayed action emerges to ensure that the bombs penetrate before exploding. The The Nolamamaru transport takes 3 hits from jump bombs in quick succession. The explosions opened its hull like a can opener, flooding its holds where hundreds of soldiers are crammed into cargo spaces. Soldiers wearing full combat gear have no chance of escaping the rapidly flooding compartments, and witnesses describe hearing their screams even above the roar of aircraft engines and exploding munitions.
Commander Yasumi Doisi aboard Tokitake watches in horror as his carefully trained artillery crews are swept away by streams of 50-caliber fire, their bodies literally torn apart by the large-caliber rounds. He attempts to mount a defense, shouting orders to redirect fire toward low-flying attackers, but his gunners are being killed faster than they can respond, and those who survive are too terrified to remain at their posts as the B-25s approach with their noses blinking with flashes of muzzle. The Japanese Navy has never trained for this, never imagined that medium bombers could be turned into flying battleships bristling with front-firing guns, never developed tactics to counter an attack that combined strafing and bombardment at wave height. The destroyer Arashio attempts to maneuver between the attacking aircraft and the transports. Her captain tries to protect the vulnerable cargo ships with his warship, but this heroic gesture only makes her a priority target. 3 B-25s concentrate their fire on Arashio. Its 24 combined guns poured more than 2,000 rounds per minute into the destroyer, turning its superstructure into twisted metal, killing everyone on its bridge, destroying its fire control systems, and leaving its rudder stuck to starboard. Out of control, Arashio collides with the Nojima transport. Both ships come together as the fire spread between them. Their crews were unable to separate the ships or fight the flames effectively. Admiral Kimura, watching from his flagship as his convoy disintegrates around him, tries to understand what is happening, but the attack is unlike anything in Japanese naval experience or doctrine. The Americans do not follow any recognized attack pattern. They do not make torpedo runs that can be avoided. They do not drop bombs from height that can be dodged, but they pierce at point-blank range with automatic weapons that turn their ships into slaughterhouses. He orders evasive maneuvers, but the B-25s are too fast and too numerous, and they seem to be coming from all directions at once. Its 8 cannon noses spit death at any ship that tries to maintain formation. The Maru transport Oya becomes a particular focus of attack when its captain makes the fatal mistake of turning to present his broadside to the approaching B-25s, giving them a perfect target. Lieutenant Donald McCullough at Sleepy Time Gal approaches from the beam, opening fire at 1,500 yards, its 8 guns sending a stream of piercing incendiary rounds into the hull of Oyamaru at the waterline. The rounds penetrate the side of the ship, starting fires in her cargo holds where ammunition and fuel are stored, creating secondary explosions that explode entire sections of her hull. McCullough's bombs finish what his guns started, breaking Oyamaru in half. The ship sinks so fast that most of its 1,500 embarked soldiers have no chance to escape. The attack continues for only 15 minutes, but in that brief time the carefully organized convoy becomes a scattered collection of burning shipwrecks and sinkings. The destroyer Asagumo, trying to rescue survivors from the water, is attacked by 2 B-25s, whose guns sweep their decks free of personnel before jump bombs blow holes in her hull below the waterline. Japanese sailors on the water, believing themselves safe from further attacks, watch in terror as the B-25s make strafing runs in lifeboats and swimmers. U.S. pilots following orders to prevent Japanese reinforcements from reaching New Guinea. At 10:15 a.m., as the last B-25 disappears to the south, Admiral Kimura surveys the devastation around him and realizes that the Imperial Japanese Navy has just experienced something that will fundamentally change naval warfare in the Pacific. Of its 8 transports, all are sinking or sanking, burning funeral pyres marking their positions as they glide beneath the waves, taking with them desperately needed supplies and equipment in Lae. 4 of her 8 destroyers are missing, including her flagship Shirayuki, and the surviving destroyers are damaged to varying degrees, their decks covered in dead and wounded, their superstructures riddled with .50 caliber holes. The human cost becomes apparent when the surviving destroyers attempt rescue operations, finding the water full of bodies and debris, but relatively few soldiers alive. Of the 6,900 troops who sailed from Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 will eventually arrive in Lae, most of these rescued by Japanese submarines arriving after dark. The majority of the 51st Division has been destroyed, not in ground combat, where they could have counterattacked, not by naval fire, where they could have had warning, but by modified bombers that turn their transports into death traps in minutes. Captain Tamachihara, one of the few senior officers to survive, would later write that the attack was unlike anything we had ever experienced or imagined possible, describing how the B-25 seemed to split our ships in half with their concentrated firepower. The psychological impact on the Imperial Japanese Navy is even greater than the physical losses. As news of the convoy's destruction spreads throughout the fleet, naval officers who had dismissed American bombing as ineffective are forced to face the reality that the Americans have developed a weapon against which traditional naval defenses are useless. The 8.50 caliber cannons in the nose of each B-25 represent more front-firing automatic weapons than most destroyers, and unlike ship-mounted cannons, these weapons can be used with the speed and flexibility of airplanes. Japanese naval doctrine based on surface engagements and traditional airstrikes has no answer to flying gunboats that can destroy a convoy in minutes. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, receives the report of the Bismarck Sea disaster with visible shock. Understanding immediately that Japan can no longer risk surface ships in waters within range of U.S. aircraft, the Navy's inability to protect even a heavily escorted convoy means that reinforcement and resupply of forward positions will be nearly impossible, effectively dooming Japanese garrisons in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. Yamamoto orders an immediate review of convoy procedures and anti-aircraft defenses, but privately admits to his staff that there may not be an effective counterattack on the American Strafer bombers. The transformation of the B-25 Mitchell from a conventional medium bomber to a machine gun gunship represents American mechanical ingenuity at its finest, born out of practical needs of war rather than pre-war doctrine or planning. Happy Gun, working with limited resources under primitive conditions, created a weapon that would prove more effective against shipping than specially designed attack aircraft, demonstrating American talent for innovation and adaptation. The 8-barrel nose modification would become standard on late-production B-25J models, with North American aviation incorporating weapon field modifications into factory production, creating aircraft that could carry up to 18 front-firing 50-caliber machine guns. Following the victory in the Bismarck Sea, B-25 strafers spread throughout the southwestern Pacific, appearing wherever Japanese ships attempted to operate. The 345th Bombardment Group, known as the Arapages, received B-25 strafers in August 1943 and immediately began hunting Japanese coastal traffic around New Guinea. Its planes, decorated with distinctive shark mouths, became synonymous with death for Japanese sailors. The 38th Bombardment Group converted to machine guns and developed new tactics for attacking harbors and anchorages, including night attacks using radars to locate targets in complete darkness. In late 1943, Japanese naval officials reported that the daytime movement of anything larger than a fishing boat had become suicidal in waters within range of the B-25.
The impact on Japanese logistics proves catastrophic, as the Navy is forced to rely more and more on fast submarines and destroyers that operate at night to supply advanced garrisons. These methods can only deliver a fraction of what surface convoys could carry, meaning that Japanese forces across the Pacific begin to suffer shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The Los Angeles garrison, which the March 3 convoy was supposed to reinforce, never received adequate supplies and was finally evacuated in September 1943. Soldiers were forced to march through the jungle and mountains with massive casualties from starvation and disease. Japanese attempts to counter the B-25 strafers prove largely ineffective, as the aircraft's speed and firepower make them difficult targets for fighters. While their low-altitude attacks negate the effectiveness of heavy anti-aircraft guns, the Japanese developed new tactics, including suicide attacks from fighters attempting to ram the B-25s. But these desperate measures cannot stop the constant wear and tear of Japanese shipping.
By mid-1944, the Japanese merchant marine had lost more than 60% of its tonnage, much of it to 50 caliber machine guns and bombing attacks that turned cargo ships and transports into burning wreckage within minutes. The B-25 strafers continued their deadly work throughout 1944, expanding their targets to include Japanese airfields, where their 8-gun noses prove equally effective at destroying aircraft on the ground. The 17 and 21 August 1943 raids on Wewak demonstrate this versatility, as B-25 machine guns destroy more than 170 Japanese aircraft in a series of low-altitude attacks that leave the Japanese 4th Air Army virtually defenseless. Japanese pilots describe the horror of seeing B-25s approach treetop level. Their nose cannons destroy everything in their path, turning carefully scattered planes into burning wreckage before the bombs complete the destruction. During the Battle of Biak in May 1944, the B-25 strafers once again proved their worth against Japanese naval forces attempting to reinforce the island. On 8 June 1944, 10 B-25s of the 17th Reconnaissance Squadron attack a flotilla of Japanese destroyers. Its 8-cannon noses riddle the destroyer Harrison with armor-piercing incendiary rounds before jump bombs send it to the bottom. The attack forces the Japanese to abandon their reinforcement effort, leaving the Biak garrison fighting without support. Another example of how B-25 machine guns could influence entire campaigns by denying the enemy freedom of movement at sea. The crews who fly these modified B-25s develop their own culture and traditions, painting elaborate art on the nose of their aircraft, giving them names such as Dirty Dora, Pluto, and Hell's Angel that reflect their aggressive role. These men understand that they are flying something unique in war, an aircraft that combines the range and payload of a bomber with firepower superior to that of most fighter aircraft. They pride themselves on their ability to destroy ships that conventional bombers can't reach, knowing that every Japanese ship they sink means fewer supplies and reinforcements reaching enemy garrisons. Japanese soldiers and sailors who survive encounters with B-25 machine guns bear psychological scars that affect their performance in subsequent operations. Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto, a survivor of the Kaikusi Maru transport, describes recurring nightmares about American planes with 8 eyes of death. Unable to forget the sight of his comrades being torn apart by 50 caliber fire, Commander Toshio Abe, who witnessed a Bismarck Sea massacre from a rescue destroyer, reports that his crew is paralyzed with fear whenever they hear aircraft engines, knowing that B-25 machine guns could appear at any moment. The effectiveness of the B-25 strafer forced fundamental changes in Japanese strategic planning, as commanders must now assume that any movement in daylight will be detected and attacked. Operations that would have been routine in 1942 become impossible by the end of 1943, forcing the Japanese to take increasingly desperate measures to keep their garrisons scattered. The famous Tokyo Express destroyers heading for the Guadalcanal represent an adaptation, using speed and darkness to avoid air attacks. But even these high-speed races suffer losses when radar-equipped B-25 strafers start hunting at night. By early 1944, Japanese naval officers were writing reports describing the B-25 strafer as the most feared weapon in the Pacific, more devastating than submarines, more accurate than dive bombers, more flexible than torpedo planes. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet, admits in a classified report that the Imperial Navy has no effective defense against massive strafer attacks, recommending that surface ships avoid operating within 500 meters of U.S. air bases. This essentially grants vast areas of the Pacific to U.S. control, as B-25s operating from forward bases can cover huge areas of the ocean. Australia's contribution to the B-25 strafer force deserves special recognition, as Royal Australian Air Force crews fly alongside the Americans throughout the campaign. Number 18 Squadron RAF operates B-25 strafers from 1944 onwards. Their aircraft were distinguished by RAF roundels, but carried the same devastating 8-gun nose configuration. Australian pilots proved particularly aggressive in attacking Japanese coastal navigation around the Dutch East Indies. Their intimate knowledge of regional waters allowed them to find targets that American crews might miss. The technical evolution of the B-25 Strafer continues throughout the war, with subsequent modifications including rocket launchers, improved sights, and even experiments with 75mm cannons to engage larger ships. The B-25J-22, the ultimate machine gun variant, carries 8 package gun nose cannons on the fuselage sides, 2 in the upper turret, 2 in the waist positions, and 2 in the tail. A total of 18 50-caliber machine guns that can deliver devastating firepower from multiple angles. These late-war variants are flying arsenals capable of destroying entire convoys without assistance. German and Italian military observers, when they learn of American machine gun tactics through intelligence reports, express their amazement at the concept of converting medium bombers into gunboats. The Luftwaffe attempts similar modifications with Junkers J-88 aircraft, installing forward-firing guns for anti-ship attacks, but never achieves the concentrated firepower of the B-25's 8-gun nose. Italian forces in the Mediterranean use similar bombing techniques with their SM-79 torpedo bombers, but lack the advanced firepower to suppress anti-aircraft defenses as B-25 Strafers do. The impact of the B-25 Strafer extends beyond its immediate tactical success, influencing aircraft design and post-war military doctrine. The concept of a heavily armed gunship proves so successful that it leads directly to the development of aircraft such as the AC-47 Spooky and AC-130 Spectre gunboats used in Vietnam and subsequent conflicts. Integrating massive firepower into an aircraft designed for other purposes becomes standard U.S. military practice that can be traced directly back to Pappy's gun modifications in Australia. Japanese military historians, writing after the war, recognized that the B-25 machine gun represents one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Pacific War, comparable to radar or encoder in its impact. Professor Masanori Inito of the Japan Defense University writes that the Strafer bomber destroyed not only our ships, but our entire concept of naval warfare, forcing Japan to abandon offensive operations earlier than would have been necessary. The inability to protect the ships from machine gun attack hastened Japan's defeat by preventing the concentration of forces for counter-offensives. Stories of individual B-25 machine gun attacks become legendary within the units that fly them, passed down from veteran crews to replacements as examples of what the aircraft can achieve. The attack on Simpsons Harbor and Rabaul on November 2, 1943, C-7 B-25 machine guns sweep the anchorage at mast height. Their weapons destroy or damage dozens of vessels, while jump bombs sink larger ships at their moorings.
Japanese witnesses described the harbor being turned into a cauldron of burning oil and explosive ammunition in less than 10 minutes, with rescue efforts impossible due to the continuous strafing of anyone who ventured onto the docks. The modification process itself becomes increasingly sophisticated as mechanics gain experience with the B-25 structure and capabilities. By the end of 1943, field modification centers were able to convert a standard B-25 into a machine gun configuration in less than a week, installing the 8-pointed guns, additional ammunition storage, and reinforced mounting points with practiced efficiency. Ammunition feeding systems are refined to prevent jamming during violent maneuvers. The gun harmonization is refined to concentrate fire at an optimal range, and the firing mechanisms are modified to allow the pilot to fire selective guns or all 8 simultaneously. The jump bombing technique also evolves as pilots gain experience attacking different types of vessels in different conditions. Pilots learn that approaching at a slight angle rather than directly makes it harder for anti-aircraft gunners to track them, while also allowing for accurate bomb delivery.
They find that dropping bombs at exactly 60 feet altitude and 340 yards from the target produces optimal jump patterns, with the bombs bouncing once or twice before hitting the waterline. Delay fuses adjust according to target type, with 4-second delays for thin-skin transports and 6-second delays for armored warships. The Japanese Navy's attempts to adapt to the threat of machine guns include desperate measures such as mounting additional light anti-aircraft guns in every available space, but these additions prove inadequate against the volume of fire of 8 50-caliber synchronized machine guns. Some Japanese captains attempt radical evasive maneuvers, such as coming to a screeching halt in the water or suddenly reversing course, but the B-25's speed and maneuverability allow pilots to adjust their aim quickly. The installation of radar-guided anti-aircraft guns on some Japanese ships provides a marginal improvement. But by the time these systems are deployed, American superiority in the air is so complete that most attacks involve overwhelming numbers. The maintenance crews that support the operations of the B-25 Strafer deserve credit for keeping these heavily modified aircraft operational under primitive conditions. 8-point guns require constant maintenance to prevent corrosion in the humid environment of the Pacific. Ammunition feeds must be cleaned and adjusted after each mission, and the stress of low-level operations causes increased wear and tear on engines and airframes. Crew chiefs work during tropical nights to prepare aircraft for dawn missions, knowing that mechanical failure during a low-level attack almost certainly means death for the aircrew. The intelligence network that supports machine gun operations is equally important, with coastal watchmen, underwater patrols, and code breaking that provide information on the movements of Japanese ships. B-25 squadrons often receive target briefings just hours before a mission, allowing them to catch Japanese vessels at their most vulnerable moments. The ability to strike targets of opportunity, made possible by the B-25's range and firepower, means that no Japanese vessel can be considered safe anywhere within 500 miles of a U.S. airfield. The human toll of strafing operations on U.S. crews cannot be ignored, as low-level strikes on defended targets result in significant casualties. The 3rd Strike Group alone loses more than 40 B-25s during the war, most shot down during strafing attacks when they are most vulnerable to ground fire. The psychological stress of flying directly into enemy cannons, maintaining a steady flight while under fire, and stopping at the last second to avoid collision takes its toll on pilots and crews. Many veteran pilots develop nervous conditions that force them to be relieved of combat duty. Their limits were reached after too many missions, watching tracer rounds reach their planes. The success of the B-25 Strafer influences American tactical doctrine throughout the military, demonstrating that innovative field modifications can sometimes prove more effective than specially designed weapons. The willingness of commanders like General Kenny to support unconventional solutions, even when they violate established doctrine, is crucial to American success in the Pacific. The Strafer program shows that giving creative individuals like Pappy Gunn the resources and freedom to experiment can produce revolutionary results that change the entire nature of war. Japanese survivors of Strafer attacks often express particular horror at the weapon's impersonal nature, describing how the 8-barreled nose turned slaughter into an industrial process. Unlike dive bombing or torpedo attacks, where individual skill is very important, the B-25 Strafer simply points its nose at a target and unleashes a current of destruction that wipes out everything in its path. A Japanese officer compares it to being attacked by a nest of flying machine guns, impossible to suppress, impossible to escape, arriving unannounced to turn ships into coal houses in seconds.
The final evolution of B-25 machine gun tactics occurs in 1945 as crews prepare for the invasion of Japan, developing techniques to attack suicide ships, coastal defenses, and industrial targets. The 8-gun nose proves to be equally effective against ground targets, turning railroad locomotives into scrap metal, destroying radar installations, and suppressing anti-aircraft positions during larger raids. There are plans for massive machine gun sweeps through Japanese ports and anchorages, with the intention of destroying the remnants of the Imperial Navy before the invasion forces arrive. Although Japan's surrender makes these operations unnecessary, the legacy of the B-25 Strafer lives on in modern military aviation, where the concept of heavily armed ground attack aircraft remains central to tactical doctrine. The A-10 Thunderbolt II Warthog, with its massive 30mm cannon, represents a direct descendant of the B-25 Strafer, designed to destroy ground targets with overwhelming firepower delivered at close range. The success of fighter jets in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan can be traced directly back to workshops in Australia, where Pappy Gun first installed 8 machine guns in the nose of a bomber. Veterans of B-25 Strafer units hold reunions decades after the war, sharing memories of missions that seemed suicidal at the time, but proved devastatingly effective. They remember the smell of cordite that filled the cockpit when 8 cannons fired simultaneously, the vibration that shook the entire plane, the sight of Japanese ships crumbling under his fire. These men know that they flew something unique in the history of air warfare.
An improvised weapon that proved more effective than anything the designers had planned, a testament to American ingenuity and adaptability. The Japanese military in post-war analyses identifies the B-25 Strafer as one of the 3 innovations that doomed its empire, along with radar and code breaking. The inability to protect ships from machine gun attack meant that Japan's island empire could not hold on, as garrisons withered from lack of supplies while reinforcements never arrived. Admiral Somu Toyota, the last commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, states simply that the 8-gun B-25 destroyed our ability to move by sea, a capability that Japan, as an island nation, could not afford to lose. The technical specifications of the B-25 Strafer become legendary among aviation enthusiasts who marvel at the audacity of installing 850 caliber machine guns in an aircraft never designed for such an armament. Each weapon weighs 64 pounds, fires 850 rounds per minute, and requires elaborate ammunition feeding systems to maintain continuous fire. The 8 guns together weigh more than 500 pounds, not counting ammunition, requiring careful weight distribution to maintain the aircraft's center of gravity. The ammunition load of 400 rounds per gun means 3,200 rounds in total, enough for about 30 seconds of continuous fire, although pilots rarely fire for more than 8 seconds at a time. The B-25 Strafer represents more than a successful weapon system. It embodies the American approach to warfare in World War II, combining technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and aggressive execution. Where other nations might have spent years developing a purpose-built Strafer aircraft, the Americans modified existing bombers in field workshops, tested them in combat, and refined them based on experience. The willingness to experiment, accept risk, and trust the judgment of combat personnel over distant planners proved crucial to victory in the Pacific. As the war ends, B-25 Strafer crews are among the most decorated in the Army Air Forces. Their missions directly contributed to the isolation and defeat of Japanese forces throughout the Pacific. The unit's presidential citations, distinguished flight crosses, and silver stars earned by Strafer crews reflect the extreme danger and exceptional effectiveness of its operations. These decorations, however, cannot fully capture the impact of their service. The sight of 8 streams of tracer fire that stretched out to destroy enemy ships, turning the tide of battle in 15 minutes over the Bismarck Sea. The last B-25 strafer mission of World War II occurs on August 14, 1945, the day Japan announces its surrender. As the planes of the 345th Bombardment Group attack Japanese ships in the Inland Sea, even at the end of the war, with Japan's defeat certain, the 8 noses of the guns prove their worth, destroying several small ships that were trying to flee to Korea. The crews returned to find that the war was over. Their single weapon was no longer needed, although the concept they demonstrated would influence military aviation for generations to come. In the final analysis, the B-25 strafer stands as perhaps the most successful field modification in the history of military aviation, transforming a conventional medium bomber into a ship-killing monster that terrorized Japanese naval forces. From Pappy Gunn's early experiments at Eagle Farm to the mass-produced B-25J-22 with 18 weapons, the strafer program demonstrates how innovation born of necessity can surpass anything planned by conventional wisdom. The 850 caliber cannons protruding from the B-25's nose became a symbol of American determination and ingenuity, proving that in modern warfare, the side that adapts the fastest often wins. The story of Japan's encounter with the B-25 strafer is ultimately one of technological surprise and tactical revolution, in which assumptions about air warfare were shattered within minutes over the Bismarck Sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy, proud heir to the samurai tradition and victor at Tsushima, found itself helpless against the Texas mechanics and Kansas pilots who converted the bombers into flying buses. The 8-gun nose that Admiral Kimura saw approaching his convoy on March 3, 1943, represented not only a new weapon, but a new kind of warfare, one where innovation trumped tradition and where a few modified aircraft could destroy an empire's ability to sustain itself.